are now live, I think.
Let's see.
Wait for the delay.
I'll know when I'm live because I'll get that weird thing.
Yep.
Yep, we're live.
Like we are. I can only see you though, Ethan.
Oh, do I have a spotlight on?
You can leave it.
There we go. I think I changed it.
Let's see.
Hello, everybody. There we go. Yep.
Okay, looks good.
Perfect.
Looks good.
And I have muted myself. Good morning. The nether worlds of the internets and YouTube and Facebooks and all that stuff.
Oh, do I have a spotlight on?
Someone has
That's so funny.
Are we good?
I think so.
I think I had myself unmuted again. I had 2 YouTube pages open.
We should make a compilation of all of our intros.
Make a good gag reel.
Yeah.
Awkward intro.
It's good.
Good morning again, everyone.
Yes, officially good morning. Happy Saturday, October 24th.
Yes, we haven't seen you all since the Backyard Birding Blitz fall migration as we focused on the fall migration of birds for September. We had a great time there, but now we are transitioning to our next theme of in October, at least in the Great Lakes region for salmon, because they do something, they have a pretty unique pattern that they go through at this time of year. And so we're focusing this month on these salmon, and we're going to talk all about salmon today while you all hang out in your backyards and collect some data and stuff like that. So we have a whole slew of things that we're going to be talking about. And hopefully at the same time, you're all going to be collecting some data.
And I guarantee you, we all had a good time last month, and we hope you did too. And our first chatting guest is Jennifer Liszewski, one of the all-stars of the iNaturalist project and the Backyard Naturalist. And it's so great to see you, Jen. And we just took a quick peek at the iNaturalist Yardversity webpage. And Jen currently holds 4th place in the number of entries into the project. So that is, if there's podiums, she's definitely on there. And also, unique in that she's an expert in certain groups of insects. So always helpful to have her. And good morning to you, Jennifer, also.
It's also really cool on iNaturalist. I can maybe go into this later, but you can kind of do your own analysis of the data within the project and kind of see by location or by research grade, like it's really obtained that like high level of qualification. You can do it by number of observers. So there's some little things you can do in iNaturalist to kind of understand the data on your own level in a very simple and easy way. So I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves by diving in like that. So I think we might as well get started. Should I hand it over to Maggie to get us started?
Yeah, so Ethan kind of talked about kind of the gist of the Yardversity project, but just for a little background for those who are new to the project, the idea stemmed from kind of the lack of data coming from people's yards. So a lot of scientific research and data has been collected in public lands, public parks, and other large private areas, but really backyards make up such a huge part of the world, honestly, and they really create a habitat of their own. So, you know, as a lot of the world is becoming so urbanized and yards are kind of getting smaller, it's really important to see what we have just out our doors and what kind of life we're supporting. So that is kind of the purpose of this project, is to document what we have in our yards. And to kind of guide each month where we pick a topic just to talk about. So some of you may not have salmon in your backyard, but it is just kind of an interesting thing to talk about. Yeah, so we'll learn all about salmon today. And so
what can we expect for today? What can we expect for the day? What's the plan?
The plan is, so Ethan will delve into iNaturalist for those who haven't used it yet or need a refresher on how to record and submit data. It's an app on your smartphone, or a website as well if you're using your computer. And then from 9:15ish until 10:30, we will, Tim, Ethan, and I will just be chatting on YouTube Live here all about salmon, so feel free to listen. But during that time, head out to your yard and start collecting data and photos of whatever you find in your yard. Plants, animals, anything that looks weird. Sometimes tracks are even cool. It can pick up, so get creative.
You know, Maggie, I was thinking about what you just said is, you know, let's just say this is a normal field trip, right? We were going to go catch birds or not catch birds. We were going to go look for birds, or we're going to do bird walk. Or we're going to do a dragonfly, right? And you wake up and you look up and oh my gosh, it's so cold and maybe rainy this morning. And what I love about Yardversity is, well, okay, it might be a little cold outside. I'm going to go out and see what's in my backyard. Then I'm going to go back in my kitchen, grab my coffee and warm up for a little while, or just maybe look it, you know, through my kitchen window or something like that. That's what I love about Yardversity, is it really brings it home. And on a day like today, this is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then best of all, 10:30 a.m. until 11, trivia. I know that's everyone's favorite. So,
well, Corey and Ivy in particular, man, she's the one that just blows everybody else out of the water. I'm glad they're joining us today too. And Corey, Ivy, and Benji also are in the top 4 of submissions. So they're in third place, only one submission ahead of Jen. So I'm seeing some really tight competition going in between Jen and the Zimmer family, as they call themselves.
I also just want to talk a little bit about October. For many of you likely joining in the Wisconsin, Milwaukee area, we're in fall, right? It's cold and some of the plants are starting to die down. And that's part of the idea of the project, is to capture that change of phenology through a whole year. And so you may have taken pictures of different plants that were maybe flowering, that had leaves on, and now they're looking a little wilted. Maybe the last blooming aster or goldenrod is on there. And so we encourage you to continue taking photos of the same plants, maybe even animals that you have, because that time period is really important to know. Like if we see the last blooming flower on a plant, that's really important to know when, at what time of year, and comparing it over time, when that flower kind of wraps up its blooming. Is it starting to happen earlier, later, or is it the same year after year after year? So that's kind of why this project is important, and why October is a great time to capture some of those last changes in phenology in your backyard, at least plant-wise. So,
and Kathy also just checked in, fascinated by the salmon migration. We're going to talk all about the salmon migration a little bit later. So, but great to see you too, Kathy.
So I think, first hard frost and tosa. So probably not many insects. Thank you, Jennifer, for that little check-in.
Mm-hmm. Lots of squirrels in my yard right here. They're doing well.
Do you think there's anything else we want to go over before we officially send people out to start collecting if they so wish? Otherwise, we'll get started with our kind of scheduled program.
I think we're ready. I think anytime you want to head out and start collecting, go nuts. But if you just want to hang out here with us, that's fine too.
All right. So for those that already are understand the project, kind of know what's going on, They are going to head outside and kind of start taking some pictures in their backyard. Even if you go for a walk in your neighborhood and you see something in someone else's yard, if you're not going onto the property, feel free to take a picture and include that. For those that don't know much about the project and are wondering how they can participate, I'm going to walk you through iNaturalist, which is the platform we are using to collect, congregate, and analyze and look at the data. So the first thing I'm going to recommend is that you download the iNaturalist app onto your phone, or you can go onto the web browser and search iNaturalist.org. And if you don't have an account, I suggest you create your own account. I'm going to share my screen here so you can see. I'm going to share my iPad screen here in case it's easiest if you download iNaturalist onto your smartphone if you do have one. So you can take pictures on your phone out there and then upload it directly from your phone rather than taking a camera, taking a picture, and then coming back inside and then hooking it up to your computer. Easiest if you use a smartphone. All right, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to create an account. It's going to come to a little bit of a different page than this. But then it'll be pretty simple. Create an account. You need your email, create a password, et cetera, et cetera. Once you've created an account, you're likely going to come to a page here where it'll have 0 observations, where you see at the very top, it says 182. The first thing you need to do is join the correct project to place the data. And you'll see at the very bottom, you see me, and you see a green face. If you go ahead and click on the suitcase right to the right where it says projects, it'll show you all the projects I am a part of. Now, you're probably not, you haven't joined any projects, so likely be blank here. But if you're on an iPhone, go ahead and drag down and the search for project name will come up top. And once you click on search for project name, all you have to do is start typing Yardversity. And the name should pop up. The project name should pop up with this yellowish, greenish logo. So go ahead and click on that. And it will take a second to load everyone's observations. And you'll see that we have over 1,000 observations, 500 species, et cetera, et cetera. You need to join this project in order to add your data to this project. You'll see right under Yardversity where it says leave. If you have not joined it, it will say join. So go ahead and click join. And then you will be a part of the project. Some people have had trouble when they join later on, they can't add to the project. If you close out of your app, kind of like on the iPhones, you double click and kind of swipe it up, it kind of refreshes the app, like a hard reset of that specific app. That might help you officially join the project because it takes time for it to join. Otherwise, you can go online and join that way and you'll for sure join the project. All right, once you've joined the project, it should then say leave, which means you've joined it and that you can leave it. Now that you've joined the project, it's time to start collecting observations, right? iNaturalist is an app that allows you to collect observations using photographs. And the software within the app will help identify it to species if it can. And then the community will help verify your sightings to make it what we call research grade, which is a high level of verification and means that researchers around the world will are more likely to use your data for science. All right, so now you're ready to go outside and start collecting data. So you can go ahead and click the back arrow in the top left. Again, for Android, it's slightly different, but it's the same general idea. You first create an account, you join Yardversity, and then you're ready to start collecting observations. All right. So we're going to go here to the observe camera button at the very bottom middle. And now at this point in the project, it should show at minimum Yardversity. You see at the very bottom, I have Yardversity. I have other projects that I'm a part of, but Yardversity should be there. All right, you're going to click on observe, that camera button. If you've already taken photos, what you could do is take a bunch of photos on your phone just to your camera roll, and then come inside and upload them one at a time. Or you could collect the data in the moment when you're outside and upload it at that time. So we're going to pretend you're just going outside with your phone and you're ready you see a gorgeous plant that is still blooming maybe. And you take a picture, you're going to click on the camera button and your camera is going to come up, and because I'm inside, it shows my computer screen, but you're just going to take a beautiful picture of whatever that plant is. I'm going to click, actually I don't want to use this. I'm going to pretend I took one of these photos over here. Say I just took this beautiful picture. This is likely not blooming at this time, but we'll just say I took that picture just now. All right, you'll see your photos in the top left, and then you're going to click on what did you see ? And this is where the AI software will help guess what it is. I should probably have the date correct. Let me pick a different photo that hopefully has all the information in it. I've used this one before and I think it worked. Yes, okay, great. So let's say I just took this picture and you'll see under notes that I have the correct date. This was taken back in July in Milwaukee. You can see Menominee River, Milwaukee. That's really good to know that you have the location and date correct. Then you're ready to click on what did you see? And it's going to come up with all of these suggestions of what it thinks it is. If it says here are top 10 species suggestions, it's likely one of those top 10 species. And you can see wild bergamot is on the top choice, and that is indeed the correct species. And so I'm going to select that species. If it doesn't look like it, you can tap on these blue icons to the right to do some more investigation. Like what if I think it is Stokes aster down over here? I can click on the I button and kind of do some preliminary research to determine, does the picture I just took look like this? You can also look at the map at the bottom and see it would be at the very far range for me to be seeing this. It looks like it's mainly in southern to south or to northeast America. So I don't think it's Stokes aster. And the top choice will be at the very top under species suggestions. And wild bergamot is correct. So I'm going to pick that selection. All right, the last thing you need to do before you submit your first observation is selecting the right project. At the very bottom of the little middle part, you'll see the projects option with that suitcase. You're going to go ahead and click on that. And at the minimum, you should have the Yardversity project, which is right in the middle of my page there. And you're going to move this green icon to the right where it turns green. And you have now added it to that project. You can click back. And now you can see projects, it says 1. That means it's in at least one project. And hopefully it's the right project, Yardversity, if it is indeed from your yard. And then I just want to add one more thing about captive or cultivated. If you take pictures of your vegetable garden, your flower garden that you just planted this year, and you take a picture of some of those plants, be sure to use the captive/cultivated and turn that to a yes, which means that you physically altered that plant, you planted it. That's just good to know because it's technically not a wild observation, as the goldenrod that you didn't plant, or the grass you haven't, it's reseeded on self and you didn't plant it. So most of the time you're going to be the default no if you are just taking wild pictures in your backyard. And then you're ready to click share. At the very bottom, go ahead and click the green share button. And you will then, if you go back to me, you'll see it's kind of syncing up. It's loading. And it is submitting the observation. I'm going to delete this because I've already submitted it a couple months ago, but just wanted to show you how to do it. So that is how you get started with submitting observations to a naturalist. Please use the YouTube chat if you have any questions about it. Happy to re-explain it or go through any other questions. It takes a while to sync. It definitely depends on your Wi-Fi or your data plan, but it will eventually sync and share correctly.
Thank you, Ethan. And I also just want to remind all of you that there are instructional videos on how to use this. If you want to kind of go back and start over and pause and rewind and play on the UEC In My Backyard website. And there's tons of great information on that website for kids, for families, for adults. And I encourage you to look at that as kind of the overall umbrella that includes Yardversity. And I also just want to take a moment to mention that Yardversity is a collaboration. It's the brainchild of Chris Lepchek from Auburn University, a professor who's been really interested in looking at the backyards as an ecosystem, but also the Urban Ecology Center. And there's several agencies and other universities that are working together to make this a great experience.
All right, well, I think it's time to start talking about salmon and how they're so incredible and kind of their role and history within the Great Lakes. For those that were able to attend yesterday's lecture given by Rob Rugani, he went quite into depth about the history, the life cycle, and lots of facts about salmon. So for all those that attended that or were able to watch, you can count yourself an amateur expert in salmon, I would say. But we're going to talk about salmon and kind of continue that discussion on them. I think I just wanted to first start off by talking about like what salmon we have in the Great Lakes. And oftentimes we just think of, oh, there's salmon in the Great Lakes. I actually think a lot of people don't know that there are salmon in the Great Lakes. You oftentimes think of them out in Alaska or on the West Coast, things of that nature where they're migrating up in big, what's the group of salmon called?
Oh, what a great question. Good thing I have a search engine right here.
Computer with internet to look it up. A big herd of salmon moving up on the West Coast.
A run of salmon.
Oh, a run. Okay. Yeah, a run salmon. But we actually have two common types of salmon in the Great Lakes: the coho and the Chinook salmon. They're two slightly different varieties. One's bigger and one is smaller. But those are the two main types of salmon that were introduced back in the 1960s. Mainly, they were brought in to control another invasive species called the alewife, which is a bait fish found on the East Coast that got introduced, and there was very little predation on them, and so they reproduced in massive numbers, and then there was mass die-offs when they used up all the oxygen or ate up all the food, and so there were huge die-offs, and it was a big problem in the Great Lakes, and so either a professor or researcher or a DNR person from Michigan came up with the idea of introducing salmon to control the bait fish population, the alewives, and hence salmon have taken off ever since then. There have been lots of problems with salmon continuing on from there, where the population has increased and declined, and other invasive been brought into discussion that have even caused more problems. But currently we do have two common types, the coho and the Chinook salmon.
And one thing quickly about those two is that I'm really into etymology and I love the word. So Chinook is named for the Chinookan people of I think British Columbia, the first people there, and the genus, so there's Pacific salmon and there's Atlantic salmon. And the genus that are in the Pacific salmon that we have in the Great Lakes is called Oncorhynchus. And that name essentially means hooked or bent snout. And we'll talk a little bit about that bent snout later, but they only get that when they're in the breeding phase of their life cycle, that hooked jaw. And it's the males that get that hooked jaw. So the Oncorhynchus came from the Pacific, and that's what we have in the Great Lakes. And I think it's the Salmo genus comes from the Atlantic side, and we don't have that. But the key is there are no native salmon to the Great Lakes, as Ethan was mentioning.
So the reason why we're talking about salmon kind of at this time, during this month, is that salmon migrate, as oftentimes we think of the west coast of the salmon runs there. But salmon do indeed run here in the Great Lakes on the Wisconsin side and on the Michigan side. And it's really cool to see when the salmon run to go to a tributary river, which are rivers leading into a larger river or a body of water. And you can actually see the salmon migrating up the river to spawn, to lay their eggs. It may not be as dramatic as on the West Coast, but you can still see it here in Milwaukee, along the tributaries, along the Great Lakes. And we wanted to highlight this awesome pattern and behavior by the Great Lakes salmon because it really is cool. So yes, salmon do migrate. And there we have around, I think 200 to 300 species of fish in the Great Lakes. And
can I interrupt you really quickly, Ethan? I just went back to the YouTube chat. When we asked about what a group of salmon called Menal or possibly someone in Menal's family correctly identified it as a salmon run. And then we have Eric Crawford, who he said a group of salmon is a samateur or a samateur, and he qualified that with bad joke and we're spelling sorry, but we absolutely always appreciate humor and knowledge in the chat. And then we also just had a really quick question about the app. Is this a free app? And how's the security on the sharing and cookies? And Ethan, you can probably give the best answer on that.
Great question. It depends on what you're thinking about security. I'm guessing you're probably thinking about privacy, which is a great question about sharing the location of where you are, when you were, stuff like that. There is an option to obscure your documentation, your observation, where people can't see, the general public can't see where you took that picture. I believe if you do join the project, you give the project admins access to that location. It's really important to know the location of an observation. Like if I take a picture of some type of bird, of I'm trying to think of a good example, but a bird that you only really see in the Midwest. If I don't include the location and I say I saw it, say, in California, it would just be really hard to believe if there's no spatial location attached to it. Now, I understand your privacy, so you can obscure it to the general public where they can't see it. And I think that people can still, the project admins can still get that location because it's super important for research. And that's the amazing thing about iNaturalist is that you're not just taking pictures of plants and animals and you're just taking it for your own self-good. You're taking it to further community science, to further data and research for yourself and really for the entire world to some point. So let me share my screen here.
While you're sharing your screen, we have two mammals that were just entered into the database. We have an eastern gray squirrel and an eastern chipmunk from Jen Liszewski. So Corey, Benji, and Ivy, your competition's running away with this thing.
Those are good pictures too. They both look very busy doing their own.
Oh.
Their squat.
If you go to when you're in the middle of submitting your observation, you can go to GeoPrivacy. And I believe if you put it to obscured, it will say that you saw it somewhere. If you're in Milwaukee, it'll say it saw it somewhere within a small radius in Milwaukee, so it doesn't give your precise location away. Alternatively, you can go to private, and I believe at that point, only you will know exactly where that location happened. So definitely security and privacy is an issue. I would say I trust the iNaturalist community, and people are really interested in the science behind it. But yes, security and privacy is definitely something to be aware of. So I would choose obscured or private, depending on how you feel for your observations. But being open benefits the community the best, but privacy is important to consider as well. So thank you for bringing that up.
And Mina also just added that she learned the word salmon run from Nature's Most Amazing Event series, which in an episode called The Great Salmon Run, and it's highly recommended. So look out for that. Thank you, Mina. And back to salmon.
And back to, I was going to actually bring up that not only do salmon migrate, but many other species of fish in the Great Lakes migrate. Lake trout, whitefish, northern pike. Northern pike, there are actually terms, I'll have to look it up or re-find it, but there are terms for all these types of migrations with Great Lakes fish. Some fish go from the where they spawn in a wetland and they only go to the mouth of the river and they come back, or they go to the lake and they go up the river. Other ones go to the river and then they go back upstream to spawn and stuff like that. So there's all these different terms and different ways that these fish navigate migration. And migration can range from only a couple hundred meters, which is really weird to think of, but yes, fish can migrate just a few hundred meters to several hundred miles. And salmon are a bigger fish, and so they have quite a wide, in their adult life, they travel quite a ways. And so they're probably one of the longer migrators of the Great Lakes fish. But there are just hundreds of different species of fish and in the Great Lakes, and salmon are one of those. So
it's really interesting, Ethan, because when I think of fish and lakes, I mean, I go to my wonderful spot, which is up north in northern Wisconsin. And I mean, sure, you know that the lakes are usually smaller. So yeah, they're going to move around within a lake, but you don't think of them as moving very far. They move as much as they can, really, unless they're in maybe a big flowage. But I don't really normally think of freshwater fish like the ones that you mentioned as migrating, because I just think of them in lakes, and they're born in certain areas and then they move to deeper areas as they get bigger and that kind of thing. But that's really fascinating.
Before we kind of change topics here, the term for salmon or fish that live in saltwater and can also live in freshwater, there's a special term for that called, I might need help here, Maggie, is the tough word to pronounce. We call this anadromous. Did I get it right? Was I close?
I think that sounds right.
Okay. And that term means that, at least on the West Coast in Alaska, that these fish are born in freshwater rivers. They're eggs, they grow up to be adults or to teenagers, and then they go out into the ocean, which is saltwater. And it's amazing that they can be in saltwater and freshwater. It's like, we would die if we drank saltwater, right? And so for a species to live in both freshwater and saltwater is truly incredible. And then actually when they come back into the freshwater rivers to spawn, they go to the mouth of the river where the freshwater and the saltwater is mixing, and it kind of lowers the amount of salt water in there, and so it kind of they equalize themselves for a few days to maybe a couple weeks, until they feel ready. They're ready to they change their body until they're able to go up the freshwater river. So really incredible adaptation that salmon have.
And in your analogy, we can't drink water that's salt water because we're used to fresh water, but just imagine breathing it. And this happens at a cellular level. And if you think about the importance of preserving these brackish waters, these estuaries, they're fish nurseries. They're really important for a lot of things. But that's, like Ethan said, that's kind of the zone where they go to make that adjustment because the water itself is brackish, so it's part salt, part fresh, and it's so extremely important. And then the changes that they make are at the cellular levels. And if you remember back to your biology, you have sodium, potassium pumps in your cell walls that help regulate your cell wall. And when you're in a freshwater environment, you're trying to keep those salts in, otherwise they would go diluted. But then when you move to salt water, you're trying to keep those salts out. And so at the cellular level, particularly in the gills, they develop more of these pumps, and they're really changing. They're really metamorphosizing on the inside. If you thank you. So
that's awesome.
Just an incredible adaptation.
I gotta stop talking. I gotta pass it off. But the reason I brought that up is because you'll realize in the Great Lakes we don't have salt water. So technically, salmon in the Great Lakes are not anadromous. We call that term pododromous. There we go. POTAMODROMOUS. So go ahead and work on that pronunciation. But basically, that means that term applies to fish that move from one body of fresh water to another at some point in their life. So they spawn in the rivers. They're born in the rivers. They go to the lake, a freshwater lake, and then they come back to lay their eggs. And so that's the term we give it to those that use that go from one fresh body to another fresh body of water. All right, and with that, I think we're gonna shift gears. Tim and Maggie, I think we're gonna share at some point the 5 facts video by Danny at some point. So whenever we feel like that's a good point.
Yeah, and we're not going off of the salmon. We're going to continue to talk about salmon, and my goal is to kind of take us through that life cycle together. We just talked about that amazing transition that happens in their life cycle, going from fresh to salt and back. But we're gonna talk a little more about the life cycle of a salmon. But since we're also, this is Yardversity, and Yardversity's really focuses on phenology. It allows us as humans that are interested in your backyard, in our environment, whether we're professional scientists or community scientists, and your backyard is such a personal environment. It's really fun to understand what's going on in your environment. And one of the great things about iNaturalist and the Yardversity project is that once you find something in your yard, you have access to a community at the Urban Ecology Center, with the other partners in Yardversity, with the iNaturalist community, and just with the information that's out there, and you can start to look at well, okay, I just found this in my yard. Should I be worried about it? Is it going to be bad for my plants, or is this a really important species ecologically? So you found this, and now you can learn more about it. And the next time you see it, you have a better understanding of it. And that's what I love about it. So, really quickly, we should, go over some of the other changes that are happening this time of year in kind of late October. So we just heard from Jen Liszewski that we just had our first big frost. And so that means, there's some good things about that. You're going to probably not see mosquitoes anymore. And we're kind of towards the end of that. So that's something to celebrate. You're also probably not going to see too many insects in general over the winter. They're either hunkered down or they're overwintering in the egg phase. So, you can still look for them. I think it might be a little cruel this time of year to start picking up logs and looking under them, because just imagine being in your nice warm blanket and then somebody rips that off. So probably best to just kind of let them do their thing and give them the chance to survive for the winter. But there's a lot of other great things happening right now. We're kind of in the middle of a series of meteor showers. There was just one a few days ago that peaked, which was the Orionids emanating from Orion, which peaked October 20th through the 21st. And then towards the end of this month, the 29th and 30th, we're going to have another, the Southern Taurids. And one of the great things about winter meteor viewing is you don't have to stay up as late because it gets darker earlier, even though because of the physics of it all, it is best to look for meteors after midnight. But again, you can just go into your backyard and kind of try to stay warm and look for meteors. So that's happening right now. Another thing I really like about this time of year is a lot of the fall plants that are dispersing their seeds by wind are shooting them out. So if you live near cattails, those cattail seeds are starting to kind of peel apart and spread. Milkweed pods are opening, and milkweed pods to me are one of the most beautiful things in nature. My wife really loves to photograph them and the crazy patterns that come out. So now is a great time to really look at those milkweed pods. And this is the time not only insects, but herps, reptiles and amphibians are done for the winter. They're going to be hunkering down too, finding a place where they can survive, either underwater or under in the ground somewhere. And not a lot of us probably have snowshoe hares in our backyards, but this is the time of year that they're making that really cool transformation from the brownish summer coat to the white winter coat. And if you have black walnut trees, those are starting to fall. Be careful. Those things really hurt if they hit you on the noggin. And if you open them up, they really stain anything. So if you're curious, you want to open them up, do it. But it's a pretty big staining seed or pulp, I should say. And the squirrels are gathering them up for their winter. Squirrels remain active all winter. The chipmunks are going to start to hibernate if they haven't already. Although I think we did get a chipmunk from Jen, so they're still out. If you're in Washington Park, we're seeing a lot of red-winged blackbirds flocking. This is the time of year they get together in huge numbers, sometimes 200, 300, 400, 500, getting ready for that big push south. And sometimes you'll either see them in a wetland or overhead. You can see just tons of blackbirds migrating. And I think those are the main things. If you all have your favorite phenological events that are happening now, please put them in the chat. But Ethan or Maggie, is there anything you guys look forward to this time of year or notice this time of year?
Right now I have quite a few Junkos out in my yard. So they've finally made it to my yard. They've been out in the parks for a little while now, but and I got a nice cardinal too. But yeah, I think the Junkos are kind of a cute way to make the transition into the cold months. So it makes it a little sweeter, but
I do want to share, I'm going to share my screen here again, and I'm going to show challenge we're doing in iNaturalist that Urban Ecology Center is kind of running, called the Fall Phenology Challenge in Milwaukee, in kind of southern Wisconsin, really. And so I'm gonna go ahead and share that here. Basically, if you search in iNaturalist on your app, Fall Phenology in Milwaukee 2020, it's going to come up with this project. You can't actually join the project. It's not a project meant to be joined, but basically there's a list of plants and animals that the Urban Ecology Center has created that we feel represents the phenology changes of fall in Milwaukee and in general for southern Wisconsin. So if you go ahead and look at there, you'll see a list of around 20 plants here, going from the asters and the goldenrods to poison ivy. It turns this beautiful red. It might be past its peak for poison ivy. It might have already peeled back. But we're probably a few days past to some of the maple, the sugar maple here, but the witch hazel, sunflowers, the blazing star and things like that. So be sure to check out this page for some of the plants that the Urban Ecology Center really thinks represents fall. And then, of course, there's a list of around 20-ish animals that we feel represent fall, including the dark-eyed junco, as Maggie talked about. The meadowhawk species, those are a group of dragonflies that migrate through. A lot of hawks. They might be pretty hard to see, but hawks in general are migrating south as well. Warblers, we're just past that migration. But then we're going to be maybe moving into the season where we see more wild turkeys and white-tailed deer. Of course, we have the salmon. So go ahead and check out the Fall Phenology in Milwaukee 2020 project in iNaturalist. And if you see any of those in Milwaukee and you get a picture of them, they will fall into this project. And you can see that we've already had 268 observations of those fall species. The lady beetle, of course, the asters. Someone has a picture of a Chinook salmon. It looks like it has finished spawning and has died, and it's up on the bank. So go ahead and check that out for the Fall Phenology Challenge and see if you can contribute any documentations to those fall challenge species.
Should we move back to salmon and maybe share that 5 facts video?
Let's do it.
That's a great idea.
Danny's 5 Facts is a series you can find on UEC in My Backyard, and they talk about a lot of really cool species and usually about 5 minutes or less. So encourage you to check out that website again.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. We're gonna watch this great video, and some of the trivia questions may be coming out of this video, so pay attention. All right.
Welcome to another episode of 5 Facts with Danny. It's me. I'm Danny. And today I'm hanging out down by the Menominee River because this is the time of year when we can see salmon migration. So for the months of October and November, thousands of salmon are going to be moving from Lake Michigan and up all of the freshwater rivers that come out of Lake Michigan, including here at the Menominee River, for their annual migration. They're coming up to spawn, which is a fancy way to say lay their eggs. One of the species of salmon that you can see during the fall salmon migration here around Lake Michigan is the coho salmon. So today, let's learn a little bit about it. 5 facts about the coho salmon. Here we go. Fact number 1. Let's start off with the scientific name. Scientific name for coho salmon, Oncorhynchus kisuch. So let's break this down. The genus Oncorhynchus comes from 2 Greek roots. So that first half, onko, with apologies to the Greek, that comes from the Greek word that means bend. And then rhynchus, second half, comes from the Greek word meaning snout. So bent snout. This is referring to the fact that male coho salmon in the fall, when they do their migration, they develop a large bent snout. Species name, kisuch. With apologies this time to the Russians. Kisuch is the Russian common name for this fish. They call the coho salmon the kisuch. Now you might be asking yourself, why does the species name come from a Russian word? I thought you said you could see these salmon in Lake Michigan. That's very far away from Russia. And you're right. Stay tuned. We'll talk about that in a minute. Fact number 2. Coho salmon, along with pretty much every other species of salmon, exhibit a natural history trait that we refer to as Anadromous, or maybe it's Anadromous. I'm not actually sure how it's pronounced. This is your big vocabulary word for the day. So what this means is that this refers to any animal that spends the majority of its life living in a marine or saltwater environment and then migrates up out of that saltwater environment into a freshwater environment, such as a river, where it lays its eggs. Fact number 3. Along with this anadromous lifestyle comes drastically different physical appearances. So during their saltwater phase, during the majority of their life when they're living in that saltwater marine environment, coho salmon have a silvery look to the sides of their bodies and then a dark blue back. However, when they begin their migration into freshwater and they begin swimming up to lay their eggs, they go through a huge change and they look very, very different by the time they've reached their freshwater phase. So they develop bright red along the sides of their bodies. Their backs are sort of a bluish green with lots of black spots. And then their tummies begin black, and as they get ready to lay their eggs, as they become sexually mature, their tummies become bright, bright red. You'll also notice that their jaw becomes elongated, and also their snout. There's that long snout we mentioned at the beginning. Fact number 4. Coho salmon have a very specific life cycle that they go through, and they go through the cycle exactly once. So they begin their life as eggs, so 6 to 7 weeks as eggs, and then 6 to 7 weeks in what's called the red. So the red is essentially the nest. That's the area where the female lays the eggs. They'll spend another 6 to 7 weeks in there as they're absorbing the yolk of the egg and eventually becoming fully formed fish. They're going to live in that freshwater where those eggs were laid for about 1 to 2 years. So typically they'll stay through one full winter, maybe a second winter before they head out to the saltwater. They'll live out in the saltwater for 1 to 3 years. And then come fall, they will do that migration that we've been talking about. They'll migrate up the freshwater rivers. Usually they're only here for about 1 to 2 months. They have one task to do once they migrate up into the rivers. They have to lay their eggs. And so the females will lay their eggs, the males will fertilize them. Once they've done that, they've completed their life objective and they'll die. And then, of course, the cycle begins anew with those eggs that they laid up in the river. And fact number 5, I've been alluding to it, the coho salmon are not native to Lake Michigan and the Menominee River. They are what we call an introduced species. And the reason they were introduced was to deal with alewives. So alewives are very small fish. However, in the 1950s and 1960s, alewives made up 95% of the biomass in the Great Lakes. It was not an ideal situation, and no one wanted to go fishing in the Great Lakes because of it. And so, some fisheries managers introduced coho salmon along with Chinook salmon into the Great Lakes, and specifically into Lake Michigan. What that did was those salmon then began to control the population of the alewives. Now, recently we've had an issue of zebra mussels, another introduced species in the Great Lakes. And the problem is that zebra mussels filter out a lot of nutrients that are in the Great Lakes that are the food for the alewives. So because of the zebra mussels, the alewife population has gone down, which, as you can guess, has had an effect on the salmon population, which has also gone down. So all these things are connected, and we're always trying to manage all the little details to keep the ecosystem safe and healthy for the species that live there. However, I found it kind of peculiar that it seems like our solution for all these problems is just introducing new species and managing new species. So I asked our research director, hey, what the heck is up with the Great Lakes management? Why are we just always introducing all these new species? And he responded to me. This is Tim Vargo, our research director at the Urban Ecology Center. He told me it's well, I can't actually read the words that he said, but suffice it to say that he said it's kind of a mess. Now, maybe that's a bit of a hyperbolized opinion, but the fact of the matter is that the Great Lakes ecosystems are extremely delicate. And anytime we introduce a new species into that ecosystem, we have the potential to completely change everything going on, the delicate balance that is the Great Lakes ecosystems. Now, there's a lot more to this that I can't go into right now, but if you're interested in this topic, I suggest reading the book, The Death and Life of the Great Lakes by Dan Egan. This is a great book that tells the story of the Great Lakes and all the different management techniques we've been trying to help protect them and protect the species that live there. And that's going to do it for me for today. So thanks again for watching these 5 facts about the coho salmon. I hope you have many successful adventures observing the salmon migration, and we'll see you for the next one. Bye!
And thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Danny.
Thanks, Danny.
Danny went over many of the topics that we were talking about, and I ended up talking about many things that they talked about too.
And there's a lot to talk about with salmon. There's still so much we haven't even talked about yet.
Yes. All right. Shall we move on to our next topic?
Shall. I guess so. I just kind of was interested. Probably about a few years back now, I for the first time. So we're kind of changing gears here a little bit. Kind of want to talk about salmon as a food and kind of the impact it has on the species themselves and the environment. So I fell in love with salmon, and I love to eat salmon, and I feel good when I eat salmon, and it's delicious. And I think a lot of people feel the same way because production and fishing has boomed in the past few decades. And I only recently started looking into the impacts that it has. And I've found a lot more actually than what I expected to find. So I kind of just wanted to open it up to Ethan and Tim and myself just to kind of talk about our own perspectives on the sustainability of salmon farming versus wild fisheries, pros and cons of each. If you personally do anything special, like if you go into a restaurant, do you ask where they get their salmon? I guess how do you view the system? Do you have preferences? Do you have boundaries? Because I'm kind of new at this, but I've found a lot, and I guess I'll start with my opinion going back from the beginning. I've always thought like wild caught is probably healthier because it's wild. You're not getting all the additives. You're not getting chemicals and that kind of thing. But it probably takes more of a toll on the species themselves because you're depleting a natural resource. And with a little research, I've dug a little deeper into that. But I guess, do either of you have any opinions?
I love that you're asking the question, Maggie, because it's so easy for me to get caught up in just how fascinating these creatures are. And you always want to keep that lens of conservation in there and what we can do in this case as consumers or observers, because not everybody consumes meat, or anglers. And it's a really, really important question. And I encourage anybody, if you have anything to throw it in, if you have any opinions on this or thoughts or suggestions, to throw it in the chat. I mean, I think at its base level, I love to eat fish and I love salmon. And I know there's several resources out there, the little pocket guides to which fish are safer to eat, both in terms of pollutants that are in the fish that could make you sick and the sustainability of the fisheries. And I know oftentimes wild is better because the domestic farms either are throwing too many nutrients in the water, or they're working on genetics, and genes can escape just like fish can escape and affect wild populations. So, I think just having a knowledge of that as far as salmon go, and I love salmon on sushi, because I love it so much, I want to make sure that I'm doing my part in supporting or not supporting certain things. And so I think a lot of people out there probably definitely know a lot more about this than I do. But the thing that I'll throw in before we pass it over for Ethan's opinion is we brought salmon in to control alewives, and also to support the fishing industry, the angling industry, and a lot of this is sport fisher people. And so I recognize that it's complex, and I also think we should question, the fishing industry is huge. It brings in a ton of money. Hunting industry is huge. It brings in a ton of money. A lot of that goes to conservation, but it's also not that simple, in terms of, one of the reasons that this is such the king salmon in particular is it's a really good fighter. So if you're really, I don't fish, but if you're, that is something that's important. but to what degree do we take that aspect into it, which does again bring in a lot of money, versus what the original ecosystem was when we had the lake trout and the whitefish that were the dominant ones. They're not as good as fighters, but they've evolved here in terms of, catching them. Rob did a great job of talking about that side of things. And so it's people wouldn't spend as much money to come and try to reel in a whitefish or a lake trout as they would king salmon. But makes you really think about where are we spending our energy, and are we trying to spend our energy to kind of try to get that functional ecosystem, and then it can get controversial when you talk about people's livelihoods and people's interests and where the money goes. So I think my answer to that is it's so complex, and we need to listen and we need to think about all these aspects as we move forward.
I think it's just kind of weird that there's a whole industry that wasn't here over 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago. There was no industry, and it's all kind of an artificial industry that's been created. And I guess this is we have a very anthropocentric view of nature, and we do many things for our human good. So it just leaves I've just been thinking about more now that we're talking about salmon a lot, that's just important to know that. And I'm a big fan of native species and things like that, but it's salmon are introduced, and we're lauding the salmon, the recovery, removing the bait fish, but now salmon population, they're crashing, general populations are crashing, and it's just all right, I don't know, we got to step back and kind of think things through, and really understand the history, and understand how that impacted things. So going back to the sustainable fisheries, I do know that I think wild caught has a better taste in people's minds. And I don't think the wild salmon populations can really sustain the world. That just doesn't seem right. But I do know that if you do buy wild salmon, that there are certain fisheries that are sustainable fisheries, right? There's a lot of different labels out there. I'm not an expert into knowing which one is a better sustainable fishery than the other, but I do know at places in Alaska, I'm pretty sure that there are regulations on the rivers where you can't fish. They have big boats out there. You can't fish near the mouths of rivers when they kind of congregate getting ready to go up the river until a certain percentage of fish have migrated up the river. So there's a lot of mathematical calculations to determine how many fish need to move upriver to successfully create the next generation, a strong next generation. So I'm pretty sure, I think it's the Fish and Wildlife Service has a big part in that, in kind of figuring out what that number is. And then they open up fishing, open to the fishing industry. And so, yeah, I think it's important to do your research if you buy wild caught, same for farm salmon. And it all comes down to kind of what your ethics and morals are, and what your threshold is for the safety of the food coming from a farmed or from wild, because there's pros and cons of just pollutants, lead, mercury, the ethical side of farming in pens, and there are different levels of some sustainable farmed operations have bigger pens and stuff like that to raise the fish. So I think it really just comes down to your ethics and morals of what you believe is right, what you think is healthy and safe. So there's really no answer to the question.
Mm-hmm. One thing that that you kind of bring up is the idea of sustainable farming. And I know that, as you mentioned, some farms are more sustainable than others. But then there's an idea of having inland farms, because I know a lot of the issues with farms in the ocean are that you're releasing a bunch of excess nutrients, chemicals. You'll have fish escape into the wild and have that'll alter the genetic pool of the future populations, potentially decreasing fitness of those future fish. So the idea of inland farming was kind of interesting to me because you're eliminating the possibility that these nutrients and fish are going to be entering these other waterways.
And I think if you're going to do all of that engineering and maybe in an inland, I feel there's a lot more potential for, if you've got this inland system, you can, from a permaculture perspective, the fish are going to be releasing a lot of waste. One of the things that we learned from Rob is that when all these salmon go upstream to breed and die, they're really releasing a lot of nutrients for that river. That's super important. And so, there's a lot of nutrients coming from that system, and maybe they can fertilize some other crop that you're growing. And I think there's a lot more potential in feeding the world. We'd love to see so much go to a natural state, and we also have to support ourselves as humans. And there's a lot of smart people thinking about that kind of thing. So that's an interesting point, Maggie.
Well, thank you both. That was a good conversation.
I think it's interesting that we think of salmon as ecosystem engineers, and they're kind of drivers of change, of physical, or not physical, but of chemical change, because when they go up the rivers, they die. They're adding a lot of nutrients there. And that's well known in the coastal communities along Alaska and Washington, how important that really is. But again, salmon are introduced, and this hasn't been going on for thousands of years. This has only been going on for the past 40 years, where salmon are going up and then they die, and the carcasses and the eggs are fertilizing the rivers. And so I think what Rob said yesterday is that we still don't really understand the impacts of what that means for the Great Lake tributaries, and that there's still more needs to be learned. Is it helpful? How is the ecosystem adapting to this change of receiving thousands of salmon carcasses into the tributaries? How is that changing the fish, the native fish populations there? Is it helping it? Hopefully. Is it not? Maybe. So it's just really a lot to think of when you bring in really an amazing species. So yeah.
And everything else is so already engineered that it just makes it that much more difficult. And, I would think that you'd probably want to get back to having the dominant species that were here 100 years ago back. But it's controversial. I'll take a really quick break to show you that Jen Liszewski added 7 more plants. Here's another thing that iNaturalist could be, is you could, when you scroll through all of the pictures that people submit to this, you can kind of see what other people have in their backyards in terms of plants. So if you're looking to plant some really cool species, you can kind of see that. One of my favorite species that Jen took a picture of is a white turtle head. It's one of my favorite flowers, and it, I believe, relies on ants for dispersal at least, and maybe even pollination. So white turtle heads and the other blue flower that I'm drawing a blank on that has a similar flower head. So we got a few more coming in, and that brings our Yardversity observation total to 1,037 with 509 species. So we're steadily moving up.
That's awesome.
A quick thing in iNaturalist, I was able to see actually how many have obtained that research grade. And we've had over 200 different species obtaining that high level research grade, where it's been verified by the community, verified by the identification software, which means it's a very powerful observation. So super cool. I have 200 different species for sure that can be used for science. Super cool.
Great.
Let's see, where is I going to go next? Oh, kind of talking about tributaries and salmon and kind of that thing. I want to talk about another issue, which would be I'm going to go very briefly into this because we could spend the whole day talking about this, but would be um, um, fish barriers to salmon and to other fish. And this is a big issue out in the West Coast, where salmon are native to the region, where dams have played a pretty big role, huge role in limiting their access, and there are many other cultural and ecosystem level implications for removing dams there. But there's a pretty cool website called FishWorks. It's fish and then WERKS. I don't actually know if they have their own website, but it's you can kind of it's like they have a database of all the barriers around the Great Lakes, and you if you somehow get access to their data or their model, you can actually model out like the optimal. They optimize which barriers should be removed in the Great Lakes, and kind of like highlights the most significant ones that would have the biggest impact for this amount of money and that type of thing. So when I was back in school, I actually used FishWorks using GIS, which is a computer modeling program to help you, or to help kind of make our own. We identified which culverts or bridges or dams should be removed if we were to do it. So just something cool to think about. But as we talked briefly about yesterday, there's the Clutch Park Dam that's under consideration for being removed. And so there's a ton of public interest in that going both ways. So if you just Google that, I'm sure you'll find plenty of information on that. Otherwise, we'll end up debating for half an hour on here.
If there's anything else you want to mention about that, what I'd like to do is maybe just all together one more time, just go through what a salmon life is like. It's such a bizarre thing, and maybe for maybe these last 15 minutes or so together, we can just imagine what life is like as a salmon. And Ethan and Maggie definitely chime in for any stage, but easiest to start with the egg. And you'd be born, if you were salmon, you'd be, once you're fertilized, the egg, you're usually under gravel, kind of in the river bottom. You know, your mom laid this nice little area for you before she died, and so now you imagine yourself, in the Pacific Northwest, if we're talking about the Chinook salmon. And so you start off, and it's this blood red, very, very red, tiny egg with a little black speck, and that's you starting to develop. Kind of you're waiting for the winter, you're kind of dormant, and then eventually you're going to potentially, if you're a Chinook salmon, you could turn into this 100-pound 5-foot long beast, but you're starting off at this tiny egg. After you hatch from the egg, I don't know if I'm saying this right, you become an alvin or an alvin, and you should definitely Google that image. Do either of you know how to say it?
I do not.
Well, I'm just thinking Alvin and the Chipmunks, but Alvin or Alvin, and you should Google this image, because it's just this tiny little fish, and they're still attached to their yolk, is like still their belly is their yolk, and so they're just kind of hanging out. They're still under the gravel. They're not really coming out yet, and they're living off of the yolk and the egg. And a typical mom can lay 3,000 eggs. Okay, so you've got 2,909 siblings hanging out with you. But of that, if you're successful, only about 400 or 500 are going to hatch. Some of them are. There's a lot of reasons why eggs and young salmon can die. I think 800 is about the most they've ever observed for the folks that study this. And you know, if the temperature changes in the wrong way, if you could get eaten, if there's a disturbance in this nice little bed, you know, either a fisher person or a bear or something kind of steps in that area, and you get swept out of your home. Pollution, you're vulnerable at this stage. But then after you've kind of absorbed that yolk, and now this is about a month later, You emerge from the rocks, and now at this stage you went from egg to alvin to fry. You're called fry, and you're eating insects. You're eating, a lot of insects are spending a lot of their time in the aquatic stage too. So you're avoiding those big dragonfly larvae that want to eat you, but you're eating the larvae of other insects. And then once you start to work your way downstream, and you think of all the salmon videos of you going upstream, you're kind of now letting that current take you downstream. And I don't know, maybe they have fun. I don't know. I'm not a little salmon, but going down all those rapids, and then you're swimming, and then you're reaching that important kind of estuary brackish area. That's super important that Ethan brought up earlier. You're making all of those adjustments, and you're getting ready for life in the ocean. And you could be there anywhere from 2 to 5 years. But I didn't realize until I saw Rob's talk, and I probably learned this in the past, but the ocean salmon looks so different from the salmon that we're used to. And part of the reason is that they kind of get this reflective coating, like you often see in kind of sci-fi movies, where you in an invisibility cloak, or a ship becomes invisible because of reflection, like in the Marvel movies. And that's the reason they get that kind of reflective coating, is that when they're going to move into the deep ocean, they're going to become this pelagic species in the depths. And if they had all that color, they'd be very visible to things like orcas and sharks and other things that could eat them. And so they really look different. So again, if you look at the pictures of the salmon that are in the ocean versus the salmon that come up and spawn, so different. And so they're fish eating. They're eating other fish, and they're growing. They mentioned they could grow from 2 to 5 years, and they're super vulnerable at this stage. So now we started off with 3,000. Now you're probably, once they're in their ocean stage, those that survived, you're probably at less than 100 left from that 3,000. And again, some of them maybe even 6 years in the ocean. Some of them getting up to 100 pounds, bigger than a lot of people I know. And during that time, they're traveling. They could travel thousands of miles. I think Rob mentioned they can go all the way to Japan, and they're eating fish and squid and trying not to be eaten by those bigger predators. Then that craziness, they return to the exact river from which they were born. And Rob mentioned they use magnetic. They can see the magnetic field, which we can't at all, which totally blows my mind. And he mentioned that they probably use the iron in their blood, I think. Isn't that what he said? Mm-hmm. To help them, kind of, maybe they use that as like the bigger map, but then there's probably the olfactory version to get them into their rivers. And that's we barely can smell, compared to other species, and we can't sense magnetic fields. So this is totally foreign for us. I can't imagine us being able to return without the aid. We have, other ways, maps and GPSs and things like that. But now you have maybe only that huge fight up the river. They make these big anatomical changes. That big hook nose comes out. A lot of them put up weight and are eating for the last time in their lives, because now you're going to battle this upstream battle. And you've probably seen all the videos of just jumping up these waterfalls and trying to avoid fisher people and bears and other things that are trying to eat you up on the way. But then once you get there, in this huge battle to get there, you're battling with other fish. Particularly, most of the females are likely going to mate. But if you're a male, one of the reasons you get big is so that you can fight off other males. And the most successful males are going to mate with many females, and most males are not going to mate with any females. So it's really that evolutionary drive to be really big and strong, because you have to fight other males to fertilize their eggs. But there is a really interesting strategy, and you find this throughout the animal world, that some male salmon only live in the ocean for a couple of years, and they don't get big and strong and fight. And they come up just after a couple of years, and their strategy is to be sneaky and try to sneak as many fertilizations as they can. And the strategy works, otherwise there wouldn't be any. But it works for some. And so these are different types of strategies in life. And again, you see this in birds, you see this in amphibians, and it's this sneaky, it's an alternative strategy in life. And they believe it's genetically determined. So some are only going to be in the ocean for a couple of years and try to sneak some fertilizations. Others are going to become big and powerful and do it. Most of them do it that way. And again, they're not eating, they're climbing, they're swimming up these waterfalls, and they're using pretty much every last ounce of energy, and then they die. And the other thing that we really didn't talk about is that we're talking about the Great Lakes salmon, but the salmon that are in the Pacific Northwest are also under a lot of, they're in trouble. Their populations have been declining since 1984. The Chinook salmon population is down 60%. There are dams that are built in the rivers that prevent them from coming upstream. There's development, there's pollution, there's fishing. And the really kind of cool thing about this is that this strategy of going back to you, why would you invest so much in just coming back to the same spot, right? And the thought behind it is that spot was successful enough for your parents that you survived. And so just like if there were choice, you maybe make a bad choice, maybe you make a good choice. This is a good river, this is a bad river. But the chances are that if you go back to the same spot and your parents were successful, it's likely that you have a better chance of being successful too. Mm-hmm. So there's just so many cool stories about salmon, and I'm just looking at the Chinook salmon in this particular case, but it's really cool. And if anybody else has any fun salmon facts or stories, definitely put them into the chat. But I don't know, Ethan and Maggie, do you have any kind of final thoughts before we get ready for the trivia portion?
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about like really how amazing an individual salmon is. And that, so I just finished my octopus story yesterday.
Oh, I want to see that.
Great movie on Netflix. But
Octopus Teacher, right?
My Octopus Teacher, thank you. And I don't think I'll be ruining it, but like salmon they die after they spawn, and that's very similar to octopuses. And you're on this journey, and you're seeing this individual octopus. And so I think of the salmon that like is willing to give its life to start life again, right? Because the salmon dies after spawning, and that's like just like mind blowing that a species, an individual will do that, will put its entire energy, stops feeding, and put its entire muscle and fat reserves into making sure that its eggs are the most fertile and will give it the best chance at succeeding, and will literally give its life. And these are smart fish, right? These are smart species, and just like to really think about it is really incredible that there are species that do that. And that's the ultimate form of dedication and sacrifice. So I just that was just hit my mind, my brainwaves in a different level after seeing My Octopus Teacher. So
maybe they're not willing, but they're programmed.
Who knows, right?
Yeah. I wonder, this might be just kind of a weird question, but I wonder, are there any salmon that have been documented to not die?
Yes.
There have, yeah.
Really? don't know if we have time
I
to-
forget there's it's possible for some, and maybe it was the Atlantic salmon, somebody can chime in, that to actually spawn 3 times in their life, I think. To maybe look back at my notes.
It might be in either it's Atlantic or in Asian species, I think.
Mina also brought up the microplastics being such an issue, and that's also really important when you're purchasing, well, plastics in general. And I know Mina's really been a part of the anti-plastics movement, but plastics in general, particularly microplastics, whether it's specifically in products, or if if they break down. And it's really scary. So this is more than just a salmon issue. This is just kind of all life and all of the microplastics that we're ingesting. And so, as a consumer, really, whether it's letting an organization that you frequent know about, maybe some of the plastics that they're using, or encouraging to switch to alternative plastics, and I'm sure, and again, I don't know a lot about this, but we all probably should know more about this as an issue. So thank you for bringing that up, Mino.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of like plastics that, if you buy, soda can, you buy a thing of soda with a 6-pack ring and stuff like that. That's a pretty obvious way of plastic waste, but there's so many ways that it's in your shampoo, it's in your maybe not your deodorant, but there's so many other ways where you don't even think of it, that you're actually end up washing down the drain and into the water system. And it goes even past microplastics and the stuff that you're eating and drinking, that then gets passed into the waterways. And so, there's really a lot of, when you think then about the water, there's so many other avenues of ways that we're impacting it and that you or me are impacting. And so it's good to be aware of what you're flushing down the toilet, of what's going into the system, because it all ends up coming back into our system.
Prescription drugs and anything that you eat. Mino just mentioned, according to the Great Lakes Alliance studies, 100% of the fish caught in the Great Lakes contain microplastic, and that doesn't surprise me at all, as sad as that statistic is. And so this is one of the major issues that we need to invest our time and resources and energy into, and many are doing that already, but we need more for sure.
Well, we're getting close to starting trivia. So if you have any other observations that you've been collecting in your yard, go ahead and make sure you upload those into the iNaturalist, the Yardversity project. Again, let me know if you have any trouble adding it to the Yardversity project. So be sure to get those in. But I have to say it before we get into trivia. It's been a pleasure going on this journey from fry to king with you.
Oh, Ethan.
I'll share my screen again, kind of going off of Tim's life cycle.
We've got prairie smoke, we've got American senna, we've got goldenrods, hyssops, lobelia, vervain. I think these are all coming from Jen's backyard.
Nice.
Wonderful.
Prairie smoke. I'm having a hard time refreshing my page, so I'm still stuck on the gray squirrel.
And if you go to the Yardversity page on iNaturalist, it's really cool to see all the different places that have submitted to this project. So obviously there's a lot in the Milwaukee area, but we've got Chicago, we've got Madison, we've got a couple in Minnesota, we've got Colorado, we've got Ohio, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. Jenny and her family have been doing a lot up there. And you can also see who has made the observation. So even though Owen in Madison has the single most observations from an individual, is 108, Mary Beth and Justin and Felix over on the north side of Milwaukee together have 130 species or so. And then of course we have Jen Liszewski and the power team of Corey, Ivy, and Benji are up there. And so it's kind of fun to just, if you go to the Yardversity website, iNaturalist Yardversity, you can kind of see what other people are seeing in their backyards, what the most observed species is, which is the Western honeybee, followed a few spots down by the domestic dog. So it's a really fun website to explore. And go ahead, Ethan, and you're going to share your screen.
Join our journey from Western honeybee to domestic dog.
There you go. You're really full of the journeys today.
Maggie, I think one of the problems why you're not seeing the most recent observations is you have a filter on, and I think the verifiable filter is on. If you're on your phone, I'm not sure how to do that, but this is online. If you have verifiable on, it'll end at Eastern gray squirrel.
Oh.
You'll see all the observations.
Yep.
Jen has planted some of these species, and that's why they used this casual tag, which means that it's captive or cultivated, because they did indeed plant it. However, if those plants did seed and they made their own little baby plants, you would not need to use a captive cultivated tag. Before we get into trivia, I know we're all probably waiting to get into trivia. The really cool thing is if you have photos from your yard from past months or years even, you can still add it to iNaturalist as long as you have generally the right date and time. Like if you took the photo on your phone 2 years ago, usually that the phone will like kind of save that metadata of that time and place. I know Maggie was asking about, I'd seen an Eastern fox snake. I was going through my photos on my computer from a couple years ago. And I saw this, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what snake it is. Back when I was in Spooner, Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, I was biking and I came across this snake that I'm pretty sure was dead. And I took a picture of it. I had no idea what snake it was, but I uploaded it into iNaturalist like 3 days ago. And you can see that it got verified as an Eastern fox snake. I kind of did some research and it looked like an Eastern fox snake. And it indeed is an Eastern fox snake. And if you click on it, you can kind of see the map of its distribution. And it's a really small distribution of the Eastern fox snake. It's really only in Wisconsin and Michigan and northern Illinois. And the number of sightings are very few. You can zoom in, you just see so few sightings of it. So that was pretty cool to see that and learn about the Eastern fox snake. So be sure to add your observations if you have photos from your backyard from a long time ago. All right, let's get into it.
All right, so get close to your chat button, and we're gonna ask a question, and go ahead and put your answer into chat. And so who wants to lead us off?
And there is a slight delay too from YouTube to our Zoom chat. So if we're not answering what you're saying right away, just wait a few seconds and we'll get there.
All right. We'll start off with what invasive fish in the 1960s would die in mass numbers and created quite the smelly smell. The smelly mess, smelly smell. They would actually use, what do you call it? Front end loaders or
Yep.
front end loaders and haul away the number of fish in pickup or in, my equipment truck knowledge is off right now. Not pickup trucks, but those big dump trucks. Because there were so many of this fish. And at one point, they were 90 to 95% of the biomass of the entire Great Lakes, which is mind-blowing.
And you both might be a little young to remember this, but I remember when those fish would just really, the smell would waft over the city.
Mm.
Were they collecting on like Bradford Beach and all along?
I think so. I mean, maybe somebody out there remembers. I'm just going from memory here, but
looks like we have 3 answers.
Do-do-do.
We have alewife, alewife, and alewife.
Nice.
Is that correct, Ethan?
That is the correct answer.
Nice job.
That's interesting, Tim, that you've like lived through.
I've lived through a lot, young man.
But no, you've like literally lived through such drastic change in the Great Lakes. That's really fascinating. The Great Lakes have changed. That we've had 95% of the biomass being alewives at one point, and now it's changed completely. The entire structure of the Great Lakes has changed in such a short amount of time. That's
And really, without me even knowing it. In fact, when I was probably I don't know, 8 or 9 or 10 years old, I remember going up to Door County where they would do an alewife. They would literally just people would walk into the lake at night. I don't know if they use lights to shine. I think they use lights to shine, but people would walk in with their waders and these huge nets and literally just scoop up, hundreds or probably thousands of alewives for a big cook, they cook them all, fry them all up, which was a weird that you could really only do that for a period of time when the alewives were at their peak, and that, so it started as a tradition and then left as a tradition.
I think it's important to like put it all into perspective that those of you who are watching, are actually living through the same thing of a great change of the Great Lakes, of your environment that we're living in, your backyard, the parks nearby, the city. We're all living through really great change, and it just happens with the Great Lakes. It's easier to see physically the changes, knowing that the makeup of the lake is changing. So yeah. Does someone else want to go into this?
All right, Maggie, you want to go next, or?
Sure. Just gotta load the page here. All right. Question number 2. Do dissolved oxygen levels tend to be higher in warmer or colder waters?
We may not have addressed this question.
We did not.
It doesn't matter.
So this may be a tougher question.
But as a hint, salmon do better in.
What kind, Maggie?
Should I hint this?
No.
What kind of water do salmon do better in? I'll say that.
Are they like me, and do they melt in warm, or are they like
you and they freeze in cold?
Oh, I've Marin says colder. We have a colder answer.
And a cold.
I always love trivia questions where there's a 50-50, because if you don't know it, you got a 50-50 chance.
And that is correct, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So if you think about warmer or water when it's boiling, all those gases escape, like the water's moving so much, and that actually oxygen and other gases escape from it. But if it's cold and it's moving less, it can really keep in. So that's one of the things too, is why riparian habitats are so important, because trees keep the water shaded, particularly in rivers. And if you cut all the trees down, then the water gets warmer, and then there's less oxygen available to all that life in the river. And so keeping some waters cold is really, really important.
Wow. So that wasn't specifically a salmon question, but the amount of oxygen, dissolved oxygen in water levels in water is super important to salmon and to all fish and all living life within water. So great job on that answer.
All right. This is a several part question. What, if you're going from an egg to an adult salmon, what do they eat first? Right after they hatch, what are they eating? What do they eat second when they come out of the gravel? What do they eat third in the ocean? And then what do they eat fourth once they've come back to their spawning ground? So there's 4 places where they have shifts in diet. Right after they hatch, right after they come out of the gravel, when they're in the open ocean, and then when they're back in the spawning ground. So what are their 4 major dietary contributions or sources of calories.
Go ahead and use A, B, C, and D to let us know. So if you know the answer to C but don't know A and B, just go ahead and put C and then put your answer so we can kind of figure out what stage of the question you're answering.
That's a good point. And maybe I'll just I'll say I'll just put this in the chat here. So remember A, right after hatching, what do they eat? B, whoops. If you type B and a colon, you get a smiley face with sunglasses in chat.
You're learning, about the wonders of the internet and how to make your own emoji.
So again, first, what do they eat right after they hatch? Second, what do they eat when they come out of the gravel? Okay, we have a yolk. Good. That is correct. So right after they hatch, they live on their yolk. And then B, once they come out from the gravel, what do they mainly eat? And then C, what are they eating when they're in the open ocean? And D, what are they eating after they've returned to their spawning grounds?
It's a hefty question.
It is. I don't mess around. And we have an answer that I think, okay, so first they start with the yolk. And then we have sac, small fish, and then themselves. So that was part of a tricky question because once they've returned to the spawning grounds, they don't eat anything else. They just eat themselves up out from the inside. They're digesting themselves, this final sacrifice. And part C, what they eat in the open ocean, they eat fish, which is correct. And so now we're waiting for what do they eat right when they come out from under the gravel after they've eaten their yolk. Sac is not the correct answer, but we've got, yep. So again, yes, yolk is right for right after when they hatch. You can tell that I'm new to trivia because I'm asking a pretty complex question here, but I think we're all smart enough to figure this out. Bug larva, yes. I believe that's probably coming from Ivy, yes. So got the last part of it here. Nice work. Yes, they start off eating their yolk, then they switch to insects, then they switch to fish, then they switch to themselves. Nice work, everyone. All right.
Talking about what they eat and things of that nature, we're going to flip that question. And we may not have gone into this, but we'll see if we get some answers. What are the two top predators of coho salmon? And I would assume the answer is the same for salmon in general in the Great Lakes. All right, remember, this is in the Great Lakes. What are the top two predators of salmon in the Great Lakes? There you go. You put the 4 answers in the chat.
It's really interesting too to think about. I mean, when I think about, it was weird when I was looking at the life cycle of salmon, which are really close to us, you know, because they've been introduced. But then when you start thinking about salmon being eaten by orcas, I suddenly personally have a connection to orcas that I wouldn't normally have, at least even though, you know, they're so far away from me. But like, I know salmon, and salmon are eaten by orcas. Like, that suddenly makes it a little different. And of course, I wouldn't be able to make that connection if we hadn't introduced them. But I love orcas.
We have an answer of raptors. I would imagine that raptors are eating salmon. However, during the summer and things of that nature, salmon, we found out, prefer colder water, and that's usually lower in the water column, so in deeper areas of the lake. And they're not coming to the surface as much. However, I would imagine that osprey and bald eagles are picking off salmon at some point. However, that is not one of the top 2 predators of salmon.
In fact, to answer Happy 28 here with raptors, I remember specifically getting a question wrong in my ornithology test in college because eagles, the primary food of eagles is dead fish. So I imagine there's a lot of really hungry eagles that eat these salmon, particularly as eagles are spread into the area in the Great Lakes. So it's a.
I'm sure in Alaska, it's just during the salmon runs, they're just covered with eagles all along the rivers and the grizzly bears. So, yeah. The other question that is humans, that is correct. They are one of the top predators of salmon. And there is a whole fishing industry set up that is going after these what we call trophy fish, the salmon. So there's one other one. This is a tricky one. I don't think we talked about it too much. Should we reveal the answer?
I think we shall. I think we got some good answers here.
Second, or actually, I don't know which one's the top predator, but one of the top 2 predators is sea lampreys. It's kind of this it's hard to describe, a tube-like creature that they actually latch on. They have these crazy mouths and they latch on to the fish, and they just I don't know if they suck or how somehow they're just eating the fish, and they just stay attached for a really long time, and they just basically eat the fish alive.
So they actually if you want to get nightmares, Google a lamprey mouth, because it's probably the inspiration for all of these crazy movies. But some of these parasites, they actually, once they attach themselves to it, sometimes the circulatory system of the fish actually moves into. I don't think this is the case with lamprey, but with some other ones, they actually just become absorbed into that fish and become part of it.
Crazy.
Yeah, if anyone still needs a Halloween costume, try a sea lamprey.
So these came over in the ballast of ships coming from the ocean, with a ballast that kind of counterweighted the weight of the boat to keep it level. And then they'd release their ballast once they got into the Great Lakes if their load changed or something like that. And so that's kind of how sea lampreys got introduced to the Great Lakes and became one of the top predators of salmon. All right, should we move on?
We should. Let's do. Okay. What is the largest fish found in Lake Michigan, with a record of 300 pounds and a length of 8 feet?
While we ponder on this question, I wanted to mention that there is another app that works through iNaturalist called the Great Lakes Fish Finder. And it's very similar to iNaturalist. I mean, they work together, but it provides a better field guide for fish. So if you go ahead and search that app, you can actually submit your own observations to iNaturalist using this app, but they have a whole guide with pictures of the fish, and it's dedicated just for Great Lakes fish. So I'd recommend checking that out. You can submit observations through there if it is a fish within the Great Lakes region. Just wanted to throw that out there.
And that is Fish Finder, right? Fish Finder?
I think it's called the Great Lakes Fish Finder. Let me look on the app real quick just to make sure I have the name right. It's called Fish Finder, correct? Yeah.
All right. So the largest species of fish, we have a muskie coming from Mino. This record fish is not a muskie, although that's a really good guess. We also have king salmon coming in as a guess.
What is the record king salmon? What did Rob say in the?
I don't remember exactly.
30 pounds or something was the record.
Took note somewhere here.
50 pounds. I know out in the Pacific Northwest it was like 300 or like 100 at least out in the ocean. But
I don't remember specific numbers.
ding, 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 we do have a correct answer.
Sturgeon, lake sturgeon, very large, can get very large, live to be, how old can they live to be?
Oh, 100+ years.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't even start reproducing till like they're 20 or 30 or 40 years old, I think.
5 something. Yeah. If you ever visit Discovery World, I don't know COVID times, but if you ever do visit or have visited, they have the little touch tank of lake sturgeon, and those are very young lake sturgeon, and they're very small. So that's kind of a cool way to get up close with them. They're also in the rivers. Really, really cool fish.
Absolutely.
Thank you to user Happy28. The record Coho in the Great Lakes is 26 pounds, and the record Chinook is 44 pounds. So
nice. And remember, the Pacific version of the king can get over 100 pounds, but that's interesting that, in the Great Lakes it's not getting as big.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next question, and of course, because it's me, I'm gonna give you 2-part again. So the most expensive fish to be sold as meat come from the Copper River in Alaska. So 2-part question: what species of salmon sold for the highest price in history, and how much per pound do you think it was? And you can give a guess for the second one. We'll see how close you can get. But what species brought the highest market price, and then how much was it per pound?
Can you give us a clue of how many pounds it weighed?
I don't know. It doesn't say in my.
Maybe that doesn't really matter.
Well, you imagine they can be over 100 pounds, right? So my guess is that, like, I was looking at I was listening to a podcast about sushi, and the most expensive sushi ever to be sold, or the most expensive tuna to be sold for sushi was $1.5 million, $1.5 million to buy one fish.
No.
And then whoever bought it, the restaurant that bought it, made way more than that in selling it. So
no way.
The tuna are huge, though.
They are. So we're talking probably 100 pounds plus for this question. And I'll give you a clue. We have talked about this type of salmon already today. So what is the most expensive fish, salmon, ever to be sold? And give us your best guess as to how many dollars per pound it was sold from the Copper River. In fact, the Copper River, there's a lot of different types of salmon you can get from the Copper River, and that's like apparently the cream of the crop. Like, that's the place. It'd be like getting your grapes from Champagne region in France. Apparently, if you're a salmon aficionado, you want to get your salmon from the Copper River in Alaska. So
we may have some people stumped on this one.
Is there a date on this? I might have missed the date.
A date on the question? I don't know when. I don't know. Yes, I do actually have the date. It was in 2017.
2017. Okay.
When I think of salmon in Alaska, I think of sockeye salmon, but I'm not sure how big they get, or if they're the prized salmon species.
So sockeye salmon are among the 3 most expensive, the 3 most commercially valuable fish. And we have a guess, red salmon. I'm not sure. Is red salmon another way of another?
If you're saying sockeye, maybe, or
let's see. Oh, the red. Okay, yeah, the sockeye, also called red.
Yeah.
And I will say that the sockeye is among the top 3, but not quite the one that we're looking for. So red salmon or sockeye salmon is one of the most commercially valuable fish. So we're close. I'll give you the other fish that it's not in the top 3, and then maybe that'll help us narrow it down. But the other one that it's not the sockeye and it's not the coho. So there's one other type of salmon that we have talked about that is the most expensive salmon.
I would like to note, I see 2 more bird species added to the iNaturalist list for today. Black-capped chickadee and a mourning dove, and they are both lovely pictures. It's hard to get a still shot of a bird, so these are really nice. Coming from Jen.
Very nice. Well, since I want to get at least one more question in, I may have stumped you. This is why we have a mix of people asking questions. The correct answer is, either of you want to guess?
Chinook?
It is the Chinook, or the king salmon, sold at $50 per pound.
Wow.
And so I imagine if that's a 100-pound fish, that's quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
$50,000?
Huh.
No. 100 times
Only
50.
they knew.
5,000. All right, next question.
All right. $5,000.
It's Saturday morning.
$5,000 for salmon.
All right. Question. Let's see. Okay, when a female heads up the river to spawn, it creates a nest in the gravel beds to lay its egg. But there is a technical term for this nest. What is that called? And if you were watching Rob's video yesterday, he actually himself captured a video of a female salmon kind of, yeah, when you see it, it was like, I wish I had the video to show you all, but it was kind of like swishing its belly and then turn on its side to kind of move away some of the bigger gravel to displace it so there'd be fine gravel that it could lay its eggs on. But it was laying its eggs on what we call blank. It's a really cool name too. I wonder how it came to be named like that.
You know, I do too, actually. It's not what you would imagine a nest being called.
I just looked up the word, and it's got a Scottish origin, which means to clean an area or make it tidy.
Oh,
That makes sense.
cool. And
So
we have a question and an answer in the chat.
I'll address the question right now. Does iNaturalist identify cultivated garden plants from photos I might not know? Say greens from the Fondy market I purchased this morning. Yes, it probably would, as long as you say yes, it's captive or cultivated. If you're buying it, if you like bought basil or you bought something that you're going to be eating that's not actually living, you can still do that. However, I would then encourage you, if you're really just looking for the identification, to use the app called Seek, which is an extension of iNaturalist. Seek is just purely identification. iNaturalist is the same thing where it identifies, but then it submits it to a database to be used by scientists. And Seek is just for identification. So if you're just looking for identification and don't want to upload your data, go ahead and use Seek. And then use iNaturalist if you want to submit that observation to science. Go ahead, Tim.
Oh, and also right after that question, we have the correct answer. It's called a RED, R-E-D-D. So nice work. And yeah, I would say again, if you're planting a plant in your backyard and it's going to live there, then it's iNatural, then it's Yardversity worthy. But like Ethan said, if you're not planting it, if you just want to help identify something that's not going to be living in your yard or your house, then
You seek.
you seek.
Well, that wraps up our October Salmon Phenology Yardversity theme for this month. And we were so happy to spend our Saturday morning with you all as you observe some things in your backyard. Hopefully you learned some things about salmon, about October phenology, at least in the Midwest. And we're so grateful to have this morning with you. And we're looking forward to next month as we dive into mammal wildlife monitoring in your own backyard through the use of wildlife cameras. And there'll be a lot more lectures and trivia and Yardversity themed events coming next month, right before Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm. The weekend before Thanksgiving.
Great. Well, thanks, and enjoy the weekend. And if you're interested in joining us on Friday mornings, we feature different backyard species at 9 a.m. and anybody can join. And we look forward to seeing you next month. And keep an eye on your yard. Keep an eye out for changes. Take pictures. You can continue to submit during the month. And we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
And I'm going to end the stream here if I can figure it out. End stream.
You just